begin. Let us just welcome everybody. Just acknowledge that we have people here from different time zones. We have people from Australia. We also have people, one of our presenters is in Washington, D.C. right now, Father Quang Pham. So he's staying late or either early for us here. And so we have also people joining in from Thailand and from Vietnam and from various other countries as well. So welcome everybody to this special presentation. It is sort of a hybrid between a book launch and a sort of a reflection on the theme of the book from some of our contributors. So we didn't want to make it just straight out a book launch, but we wanted to use this opportunity to share with one another the fruits of our reflection as well. So we have a number of our contributors here. So before we begin, let us just take a moment to pray together. And I ask Father John, he's an Augustinian who is serving in Thailand at the moment, to give us the opening prayer.
Okay, thank you. Quieten ourselves for a moment. And here in Bangkok at the moment, there's the conference of the Federation of Asian Bishops Conference. And its theme is journeying together as peoples of Asia, and they went a different way. So maybe we pray in line with that theme, that we go not our way, but a different way. And in the opening homily of the conference, Cardinal Bo used the image of the Asian church standing in front of the burning bush of existential problems of Asia: exploitation, nuclear winter, big power rivalry, ecological holocaust, pandemic, wars and displacement, natural and man-made disasters. Quite a list. So we present ourselves, place ourselves before the God of the mess. Let us stand in faith in the midst of the world of the mess, acknowledging this is where God is. God of the mess, let us proclaim you, the God of love and compassion, with humility and sure confidence. God of the mess, let us ever witness to the gospel by who we are as we face the challenges of our times. And so we pray, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And of course, we join with all of the bishops of FABC in praying for them and with them as they deliberate on very important matters in the church during this time. And today they're also learning about and sharing about Fratelli Tutti from the reports that I've received so far. So I would like to begin with just an overview of the book that is going to be released today, and then for you to get an idea of what's behind the book and where we're coming from with this book. So let me just share my presentation with you. Share screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. I've sort of put everything I'm going to say on here because I realize some of the people joining us from other places, it might be difficult to hear So it's better if they're able to read as well. So the special presentation of the reflections today on the theme of the church communication in the new normal comes from some of the contributors of the newly published ARC book of the same title. And the book has a foreword by Antonio Perdia, who is the director of the Institute of Missiology in Tagaytay, Philippines now. There's an introduction by myself, and the main part of the book is divided into two sections. The first includes considerations for the global church, and the part two is local context, and then there's a conclusion at the end. So all the chapters in this book were researched and written during the coronavirus pandemic, which has affected every continent of the world, bringing upheavals and calamities to countries and peoples in multiple successive waves. In fact, some of the chapters were written at a time when the pandemic was raging or regaining momentum in the country where the author was residing, wreaking untold havoc on the lives and the livelihood of the people. At this time, the pandemic is still present with the appearance of new strains, infecting even those who have been triple or quadruple vaccinated. And despite some countries having declared COVID-19 endemic in order to move beyond the pandemic mentality, which can be debilitating economically, socially, and psychologically, this book doesn't make any pretense at claims of clarity due to divinely endowed wisdom or benefit of hindsight. And any assertion of clarity, if there is such a thing, would have to wait months and even years from the publication of this volume to have any credibility. Having said that, one of the extraordinary gifts of human beings is the ability to simultaneously experience the present while reflecting on the past and gazing towards the future, synthesizing all the dimensions of life, temporal, spatial, and spiritual, into a logical and meaningful narrative that can serve as a foundation, an inspiration for individual and communal self-understanding and plans of action. Indeed, the task of sense-making does not take place only on a personal level. We also have the ability to reflect collectively, thus benefiting from group wisdom and reducing risks of parochialism, myopism, extremism, the countless other negative isms that can assert themselves when there is a lack of dialogue and mutual sharing of ideas, experiences, and aspirations. We also fall into this trap when the individual human mind is allowed too freely to ruminate without the necessary restraints, self-imposed or otherwise. Thus, it is with this goal of gathering the fruits of individual and group reflections that the work of creating this volume was initiated and carried out. Not so much as a systematic study of the theme of this book, rather a combination of puzzle pieces that contribute to unveiling an extremely complex and grand picture of a world undergoing unprecedented changes and of humanity attempting to cope with what has been labeled, perhaps in a cliched manner, as the new normal. Despite this expression resurfacing in popular culture and being widely applied to the state of the world brought about by the pandemic, what exactly characterizes this new normal in the present, what it will ultimately look like in the days to come, and how long it will take for a newer normal to replace the present one remain issues that not many people have examined in a systematic way. On the other hand, one isn't sure that any such attempt will yield anything more than well-reasoned conjectures. The truth is, while human beings would like to believe that we can control the directions of global developments through our carefully devised sustainability goals and admirable scientific and technological ingenuities, the SARS-CoV-2 virus that gave us the COVID-19 pandemic reminded us that a tiny biotic creature, invisible to the naked eye, and can readily mutate to ensure its chances of survival, can throw a gigantic monkey wrench into all our meticulously thought out 5-year and 10-year plans. Despite the wide-ranging topics presented in this collection, this volume takes the word communication as the key word for the various research and reflections on the life and mission of the Catholic Church during the COVID-19 pandemic as well as post-crisis. The reader will readily recognize that what is referred to as communication here is an extremely elastic and multidimensional category. Within the context of the church, and especially as discussed in this book, communication refers to words and images that the church transmits to the faithful and to the world to help the people cope with issues brought about by the crisis. This communication helps contextualize these traumatic events in sound theological principles, which need to again and again be creatively restated and reaffirmed with every human happening, both big and small, that takes place. Second, communication also refers to pastoral and evangelizing actions carried out by the church and its members to sustain the life of the church amid the grave situation of pastors and members of the flock succumbing to COVID-19, under church doors, and unlit altar candles.
Very good, really good.
Third, communication refers to the models and strategies by the church and its leaders to employ technological means to promote ecclesial communion, nourish the faith life of the people, and to dialogue with individual and groups to create a truly synodal church. And finally, communication also refers to ways that the church discerns and engages with the signs of the times in order to transform raw experiences into valuable lessons, human suffering into salvific grace, and pandemic isolation and division into greater post-pandemic interculturality, interdependence, and collaboration. What we can see in this volume is that all the contributors are either writing from Asia or are Asian, even if they are living in another part of the world, such as the US or Europe. Asians, however, are part of the global church, and discussions are limited to the local situation alone. While part 2 of the book focuses largely on specific Asian geographical contexts, part 1 presents discussions and reflections that concern the church as a whole. What this eclectic set of research presentations demonstrates is that boundaries only exist as a human mental construct and much more fragile than what we would like to believe. The COVID-19 pandemic has clearly proved that no matter how much we try to impose borders around localities and countries, or isolate ourselves from one another, these measures of separation can easily be breached by the coronavirus. The insistence on maintaining strict isolation and confinement oftentimes only resulted in greater suffering and frustration. The life of the church is the same. The local church finds its full meaning in relations to the universal church, and the universal church carries out its mission with people not in an airtight vacuum, but in specific circumstances and places. As the church strains forward in the new normal with its losses, grief, uncertainties, and challenges, it is my hope that the discussions on church communication in this book reflect this spirit of looking for greater meaning in particular events, searching for a long-term vision from the present, and turning ongoing experience into transforming lessons. We received some comments about the book. Of course, Father Hernia wrote the foreword, and just this is one of his comments. The authors attempt to explore how things, particularly in the area of communication, can be done differently and better in the new normal. Indeed, they heed Pope Francis's insights that the COVID-19 pandemic is actually a call to reorganize the way we live life and the way we do things in life. It would indeed be a mistake if, after all of this is over, we simply bracket off the experience of the pandemic, file it away and archive it, and then go back to where we left off and continue with life as before. Rather, the challenge is for us to treasure this experience and allow it to shape the way we live life from here on. This is what the articles in this volume admirably attempt to do. Peter Phan, who is the Ignacio Eleuterio Chair of Catholic Social Thought from Georgetown University, writes, Church Communication in the New Normal, a collection of essays written by Asian social scientists, theologians, and pastoral agents, is the first volume that deals with how the church in Asia can resume democratic mission, the liturgical worship, and pastoral ministry in times of pandemic and post-pandemic. I enthusiastically recommend this volume, a fruit of profound scholarship and pastoral sensitivity, not only to all who live and work in Asia, but also to those living on other continents, both Christians and followers of other religions who work for human flourishing. Paul Sukup from Santa Clara University in the US writes, this fascinating volume helpfully combines compelling case studies of the church responses to the pandemic from throughout Asia, with analysis examining the opportunities and challenges offered by the pandemic, both to church communication and to the self-understanding of the church. It should be essential reading for pastoral ministers, scholars, and communication officers. And finally, Daniela Suspan-Jerome from St. John's University School of Theology in the US writes, Church Communication in the New Normal does timely and important scholarly work exploring the across-the-board emergence of faith communication as an essential aspect of ministry. Using COVID-19 as an overall case study, each chapter of Church Communication in the New Normal demonstrates the integral role of communication in the way a community of faith gathers, worships, and extends care. The book also showcases creative directions for ministry in light of the pandemic experience, all the while rooting the study contextually across a variety of cultural locations, both distinct but common, especially from the perspective of faith. This book is an essential addition to global scholarly reflection on pastoral communication. So the book is now available online to download for free from the ARC website. And this is also our brand new website. We just test run it today. So we decided to launch the book along with our new ARC website as well. So all you have to do is go to asianresearchcenter.org. You go into the electronic library section, and under the section called ARC Books, you're going to see this book that you can download. And there's also a couple of other books there that you can also download for free as well. So, today we have reflections from Antonio Pernia, John Murray, Norman Malcourt Pena Jr., Robin Xavier, Rico Jacoba, and then Dong Quang Pham. So I would like to now stop my sharing, and I would like to invite Father Tony Pernia to give his reflection. And you can also give a little short introduction of yourself as well as the other presenters. Please introduce yourself briefly, and then you can give your reflection. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Anthony, for this opportunity to be able to share a short reflection based on the book, Communication in the Church in the New Normal. I am Father Tony Pernia, SVD. I belong to the Society of the Divine Word. And I'm teaching here at our Mission Institute in Tagaytay. That is a in the same compound as the major seminary or the School of Theology. And we have a number of students who are from other cultures, other countries. We have students from China, from Myanmar, from Vietnam, from Indonesia. And so we are a rather intercultural, international community, student community here in our institute. And so, first of all, I'd like to thank Anthony and the contributors to this volume for gifting us with this precious book. And I'd like to congratulate Anthony and the contributors also for this book. You see, it seems that today a number of people are seeing an end to the pandemic and therefore are no longer feeling the urgency and the necessity of responding to the challenge of rethinking and renewing the way we live life and the way we do things in life. I believe, however, as I mentioned in the foreword, that it would be a mistake if we simply bracket off this experience of the pandemic and when all of this is over, simply go back to where we left off and continue with life as before, with no changes, no transformation taking place. I believe that the challenge is precisely for us to treasure this experience of the pandemic and allow it to really shape and reshape the way we live life from here on. And this, I think, is what the book does. It admirably records the many experiences of the pandemic and presents them as an impetus toward reshaping our world and the way we live our lives in this world. Today, as a result of the pandemic, there is a lot of talk about digital evangelization, but often much of the talk about this topic seems to be rather loose and arbitrary, with hardly any foundation or basis in theology. And this is exactly one of the things that this volume offers, providing a theological basis for today's interest on and need for digital evangelization. The book shows us that at the heart of the church is communication. And this is because God is communication. A God, in other words, whose nature is to communicate God's self to humanity and to the world. As we read in the book of Genesis, the very first verse, in the beginning was not just God, as God is in God's self, but rather God as Word, God as communication, God as revealing God's self to us. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And as we learned in theology, God reveals God's self, God reveals God's subjectivity through objectivity. That is, God reveals God's self through the things of this world. And this is the basis of the notion of sacramentality, which is a revered principle in Catholic theology. Today, among the things of this world is digital communication. And so the digital world may also be considered as a sacrament of God's revelation today. As the church today is faced with the proliferation of digital communication, there seems to be among Catholics a sense of ambivalence at best and a sense of confusion at worst at this new phenomenon. Among Catholics, attitudes towards digital communication range from outright rejection to suspicious distrust to cautious acceptance to enthusiastic embrace. I think that by providing a theological basis for digital evangelization, this volume can be seen as proposing critical embrace of digital communication as a way for the church to respond to the challenge of the digital world. And so may this volume contribute to the creation of a new world, a world of fraternity and solidarity, in the words of Pope Francis, a new world characterized by a greater awareness of our belonging to one another as sisters and brothers in the same human family, a greater solidarity with the poor and the excluded, greater respect and care for the earth, and greater openness to God's will and recognition of God's sovereignty. Once again, congratulations, Anthony, and the contributors to this volume. And thank you for gifting us with this rare record of our experiences of the pandemic, stimulating us to rethink and reshape our life in the new normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Tony Pania. Since we have you here, does anybody would like to ask Father Tonia a question that maybe to give an input on something that you're interested in? Because Father Tonia is an expert in many areas of theology. So let's take this opportunity, just a few minutes, to maybe have somebody raise a question that Father Tonia can also answer. Is there? Father Tony, maybe I can ask a question. I know you're going to be participating in the Missio Dei workshop that's being organized by the SVDs in Germany in a few days. And how do you think this pandemic affects our concept or the work understanding of Missio Dei? How would this experience inform Missio Dei in your understanding or opinion?
Yeah, you know, Missio Dei for me underlines the fact that mission, God's mission, is greater than what each individual, each congregation, or even all of us together can do. God's mission greater than what all of us together can do. And that is why this requires, Missio Dei entails, it requires collaboration among ourselves in the church, collaboration with others who follow other faiths, and therefore collaboration and solidarity. These are implications, I think, of Missio Dei. And I think the pandemic has underlined the need for this all the more. And that, in short, I think is what Missio Dei and the pandemic, how the pandemic reshapes our understanding of Missio Dei, underlining the need for collaboration and solidarity.
Yes. Thank you very much for that insight. Is there another question for Father Tony Pania? If you have any questions, you might also want to put in the chat. That's also possible. And then maybe we can also have some time. We can also address that later on. So now we would like to move on to the next reflection. The first reflection from the contributor is Father John, who is an Augustinian. He's an Aussie. So he'll introduce more about himself. Father John, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I first wanted to acknowledge you, Anthony, because I realise now how much work you've done, not just with a book, but with a website. And you've enabled a lot of good work and a lot of people to make a good contribution. As I was leading the prayer, there was a word I was using, God of the mess. And I was thinking the Australian accent is very rich, and it could be heard as God of the mass. And then it made me smile, because when I was in the Philippines, in Mindanao, the locals understood my English better if I spoke like John Wayne. So if I had an American accent, they'd understand me better. I'm speaking here from Bangkok in Thailand, where I've been for 17 years. And at the moment, outside Bangkok, there are over 200 bishops of Asia meeting at a conference. So here goes. On reading Father Anthony's original title for this work, I think it read as Social Communication in the Post-Pandemic Church, I immediately balked at it, for I strongly held that it was then too soon to say that we were living in the post-COVID era. As I remember, I spoke with Anthony on this. My view was that back in April, we were in a different phase of the pandemic, not out of it. On listening to me, Anthony invited me to write another article. This became my challenge to write, and so I did, and here I am. To be clear, I share from the perspective of being a reflective pastoral agent and hopefully a critical thinker. I am neither a doctor, a scientist, nor an academic. So what I share is not absolute fact, but simply the fruits of my experience, observation, and reflection. One can accept what I share or leave it. Maybe I'm just providing food for thought, or I'm just happy to have a forum within which to share and discuss. If there is any fruit from what I share, I hope it leads to the blossoming of some new or deeper thoughts and insights. Pope Francis has more than once reflected that we lie within a time when a new era is arising in the Church. I believe this reflection speaks to our world as a whole. For me, such a reflection is supported by present reality, within which so much turmoil happening all at once is surrounding humanity. It seems to me that the world's tectonic plates are grinding over each other, creating change in the wake of chaos caused. So we may be entering into a new era. I read in my work on migration the same theory, that the world is entering into a new era. I am not saying it is going to be better or worse, that is yet to be judged. The pandemic could be named to be part of this identified movement in time. For now, I'll be much simpler in my reflections. I comment as a priest who observes his faith community and the wider church within his Bangkok. Given the title of my article, I would say that a good maxim is, as we look after each other, so we look after our planet. My first reflection. Last January, I came down with COVID. It was an interesting experience, not because I was sick, but because of the wider implications of contracting COVID. As an illness, I'd suffered worse flus. By that time, I was on to my third shot of the vaccine. Firstly, going to the hospital to be tested and being found to be positive, the hospital offered me no medical advice or help. They just told me to isolate and asked me if I had insurance. Secondly, When I finally self-tested negative, getting out of isolation and back into my work routine became the great challenge. I felt as if I was a member of the unclean, even within the church for which I work. There was so much fear expressed. I could see ones around me operating within a great unknown. They required me to get a proper test from the hospital, which demanded that I continue isolating and undergo a treatment of drugs, featuring taking 12 capsules at any one time. It was an experience of exclusion and absurdity. Thoughts went through my mind. I'm testing negative. Why can't I just return to outside life? Being asked to take drugs after the event seemed absurd. Why now? In part, this post-COVID experience was imposed upon me because I'm a public person in the church. So I just kept quiet and observed and reflected on the experience, which for me was primarily like a retreat. Such was the opportunity offered to me through my having COVID. That is how I approached that time, and that's how it was for me. Thirdly, when I was released from COVID status, I felt a huge burden lift off my shoulders. It was a feeling of liberation. I literally jumped for joy. My second reflection. I learned so much from the time of the COVID pandemic. I found the whole time as one allowing me a spiritual experience. That time taught me 3 key words for humanity living together in harmony: respect, responsibility, solidarity. I cannot explain it. Those 3 words just came naturally to me out of my experience of a pandemic. Third reflection. Surveys may be interested in how many are returning to church after the interruption of COVID and lockdown. I find it more interesting to note who isn't coming anymore rather than who is coming. COVID has broken people's church routine and given them a way out, if that is what they were ever seeking. My fourth reflection. I preside regularly at Eucharist at Assumption Cathedral in Bangkok. Our faith community is multi-tiered. It has a permanent population, Thai, Filipino, other ASEAN peoples, Westerners. It has a temporary population, tourists, and various other short-term visitors. By now, we are back to our pre-COVID numbers, but the population has changed. As yet, some have not returned. Some were not happy because of the running of lockdown, believing they were badly treated and excluded, and so opt never to return. A few have died, but not all from COVID. Some left Bangkok going home and never returning. Some have sought us out during the pandemic and stay with us. Some have newly arrived in Bangkok and found us. My fifth reflection. While respecting all those personally and gravely affected by COVID, I would say that the pandemic no longer officially remains, but its impact does remain. Ones continue to get COVID or to suffer from it, having long COVID. Many are still unemployed or suffering the loss of their livelihood. Ones suffer depression brought on by COVID and its effects, so far away from home and for far too long. Loss of health, loss of socio-economic status, grief and loss. Many around me remain fearful, even with the Thai governments having opened up the country. My sixth reflection. We re-emerge gathering as a faith community again every Sunday, but not in the same way. We have forgotten the little things, our little ways, our particular culture, such as saying the rosary together after Mass during October, or how to do that special collection. We are in the process of regaining our collective memory. As we do so, we also have a good opportunity to do things differently and better, to choose what we take on and what we leave behind. We've taken the opportunity to regroup, to ask ministers to gather for a refresher meeting on what to do, to now have ushers directing people going forward to communion rather than rush and sometimes push in, to delete that same boring weekly notice at the end of every Mass. My seventh reflection, live streaming of Mass continues. It does serve its purpose. It helps keep us connected when we are separated by more than distance. When ones literally cannot make Mass for good reason, they can still feel a part of the community on a Sunday. My own sister in Brisbane has a story of this time worth sharing. Back home, she has a parish priest from elsewhere, not Thailand, whom she cannot understand properly when he speaks English. She likes him, she just cannot understand him. So every Sunday, she goes to her parish church for Mass. Then later in the morning, back home, she watches Mass from Bangkok Cathedral, where I am presiding, so that she can listen to a homily that she can understand. While I see the humor in her story, it does make a point. The faithful are freely exercising more options. I would also say her story does not stand alone in the church at this time. One sort of sideline very quickly is that my sister also noted during the pandemic, our Archbishop's always telling us we have a shortage of priests. She said, but this pandemic says we have no shortage of priests. I found that very interesting. The eighth reflection. We returned to live Mass participation in church last November. Restrictions gradually relaxed over time. As time progressed, more and more people joined us on Sunday. With the government's totally relaxing the use of face masks outside, one of the local priests gave me a strict instruction. I'm not sure if he realized what he was saying, or rather how he was saying it, but he said this. I hate to say this, John, but as it is the foreigner who is not following the rules. Outside the church, wearing face masks is up to you, but in the church, you have to wear face masks. What he said painted a rather exclusive and policing tone for approaching churchgoers. COVID has been much more than a health crisis. I will finish with a few words from a good friend back home in Australia. She recently told me that lockdown changed us all, and not for the best. She's a strong woman. Nothing like a pandemic to get change going. As for a new era, we'll see. As St. Augustine reflected back in the days of a dying Roman Empire, bad times, good times, hard times. This is what people keep saying. But let us live well, and times shall be good. We are the times. Such as we are, such are the times. Finally, once again, thank you, Father Anthony, for all your hard work and for the great opportunity you offer us to share our faith in such a public and good way. God bless.
Thank you very much, Father John. Is there anyone who would like to ask Father John a question, either about the situation in Thailand or any other thing that strikes you from what you listened to in his reflection? While we wait for a question, you can also raise your question in the chat box. If you don't want to speak, you can just type it out. I would like to show you officially the book. I forgot to show at the beginning. This is the physical book. It's quite thick, actually, and so it's about 370 odd pages, so it's quite a thick volume because there's a lot of chapters in it. And all those the book we think will be distributed electronically, and because we wanted to make research available for as many as possible in the quickest amount of time. So that's why we decided to, instead of selling it, that we would just have it online for everybody. So do we have anybody who has a reflection or a reaction to what Father John has said, or questions about what Father John has said? Yes,
Frank,
Father Sunil?
yeah, Frank, can I put your microphone off?
Mute.
Okay. Go ahead, Father Sunil.
Not a question. I would like to sympathize with Father John's beautiful reflections. I was the parish priest in Brisbane at the thick of the COVID in 2020. My last year was as a parish priest, and I could very well understand what Father John was saying, the emotions and the pain and pain of the people. But what kept me was like everybody else. I was with the people, at times suffering, at times trying my best to keep the church open in spite of all the lockdowns and sanitizing. I kept be available with the people, sometimes online, sometimes face to face, even in a small number. Somehow we got through 2020. So I just would like to say thank you, Father John, putting into words some of my feelings too.
Thank you very much. I can also say that as I share my sister's story, I'm also conscious that I'm a foreign priest in Thailand, and I experience the same thing in reverse. I sure do. So I have a great deal of sympathy and empathy.
Thank you very much for that. So now we would like to turn to, unfortunately, Father Father Norman has a mass commitment at 5, so he had to leave early. He was scheduled to speak next, but he had to leave early. So now we will go to Dr. Rico Jacoba, who is in the Philippines. Rico, are you there? I saw him earlier.
Yes, Father, I'm here. Okay.
Okay.
So I have to share my screen.
Okay. Can you also give a few words to introduce yourself before you give your reflection?
Yeah. Good afternoon here in the Philippines, and a good day to everyone anywhere in the world. No. So greetings from the city of Pines, Baguio City, the summer capital of the Philippines. I am Rico Jacoba, presently at St. Louis University as a teacher, and I am handling some CFE classes, Christian Formation Education classes, as well as theology classes. So good day to all from Baguio City. Now, in my sharing, I'd like to know if you can see the slides now being shared. Okay. I'd like to start with the title and the reflection. How the background of this particular title. The title of my sharing will be this particular article is Neighborhood Change vis-a-vis the challenges of digital neighborhood church in the post-pandemic or even in the COVID pandemic era. As I observed in my experience before the COVID-19, people were so busy. They do not mind. The neighborhood is so, everything in the neighborhood seems so normal, and seems everybody is doing everything and their own activity. It has been observed that the COVID-19 pandemic transformed much of our neighborhood dynamics to some extent, that people learn to transform face-to-face encounters to online encounters, interactions eventually, no? That is from offline to online. Let me proceed with my PowerPoint. One of the most important thing that I'd like to share this afternoon is that the realization that there is a change in neighborhood. But first, let's try to understand what neighborhood is in our context. And what's this neighborhood? Given the diverse definition of neighborhood in different contexts, there are many ways in which we can define neighborhood. It is no surprise that neighborhoods are similarly complex. The critical feature, though, is that one of the most common definition, it's living in close proximity. According to some authors, living in close proximity to one another and engaging to neighbors can result to a personal bonds and cultural understandings that are crucial for social possibilities. The personal connections and cultural understanding are clearly not always favorable. For instance, there are the story of the parallel lives of different groups were underlined in the independent assessment, reacting to the racial riots, for example, and so many other issues. Neighborhoods can be spaces for contestation as well and conflict in the same way that the prayer rooms in the universities or football stadiums can. But the implications of such conflict in the neighborhood can be much more significant because the space is residential, and standard churches as well are places that can be walked away from, disengaged with, or even ignored. Neighborhood also serve as places where people live, work, socialize, and educate their children. In the actual reality and everyday experience of the religious variety, they are increasingly significant. I'd like to argue that neighborhood is human scale setting for recognizing and making sense of diversity, which can be favorably facilitated or neglected. Moreover, neighborhood is reachable. It is built, designed, and sculptured over time, and it will result to some localized manifestations and even impact the change and the movement that shape the city or the whole country. The classic representation of neighborhoods. Some authors noted that different scholars have diverse approaches in the study of neighborhood, from viewing it as simple community to a casual force in individual life chances to a lifestyle choices. Having said this, authors defined neighborhood only as overlapping social networks with specific and variable times in geographies. Notice that the emphasis is on variability or crucial social elements and the contingency of space and time and their definition. Moreover, this definition disproved a long history of debate on how the clarity of this term. The literatures of the neighborhood as a concept can be traced back to the late 19th and even early 20th century. During this era, scholars examined the effect of urban living on form of social life and individual connections under communities and society. Martin argued that most American urban scholars today trace the concept of neighborhood as a community and as an influence of individuals to the Chicago School of Sociology, which sought to define types of neighborhoods and the cycles of the land use change that fostered neighborhood change over time. In terms of neighborhood as interaction system, there are 6 themes that I'd like to discuss here. There are 2 examples that I can mention, which this line of argumentation, these are the works of Shuttles and Fishers. The proposal of Suttle carried with it several levels accompanied by his conception of typology of neighborhood. One level in his proposal is anchored on the archetype organization that serves as primary group of neighborhoods. Another type is more segmented but regularized set of relations to deal with outside group and institutions. Moreover, there are also other things of neighborhood that can be mentioned. In other works of Olson, there are 6 themes: neighborhood as form of social organization, an ideology or determinant of behavior, a consequence of social organization or a social network, and a typology. These 6 major themes are classified under the categories of social interactions that focuses mostly in the lifestyle in the urban on suburbans. There are other suggestions or suggested concepts that are popularized by other authors in 1980s, and most of this must be understood in terms of changing ideology in the urban life. What I'd like to emphasize here is the dynamic of the classic representation of neighborhood chains. From the concept of neighborhood, we now move on to the neighborhood chains. Under the classic representation or perspective, there are several views about neighborhood chains. Hawley, in the 1950s, understood neighborhood from the demographic or ecological perspective, focused on the population and the structured activities developed by population numbers. The crucial demographic influence affecting change in the formation of neighborhood inhabitation is migration. Other classic model of neighborhood is in the social-cultural organization perspective. This perspective's main presentation of neighborhood is on the forms of social relations that involve within the context of neighborhood and the attitudes and values of the population. This perspective was advocated by several scholars and in the early 1920s. It is good to note that having a neighborhood, several services categories and facilities are delivered. This neighborhood provides facilities like health facilities, clubs, recreational facilities like gyms, cultural, commercial, religion facilities, and many other facilities needed for social services. These are within reasonable and accessible distance for most residents.
Rico, I would like to remind you that you have just about 5 more minutes.
Okay, Father. And this current perspective on neighborhood change, no? The basic concept of neighborhood basically changed, but practically during the time of COVID pandemic, neighborhood was fueled. The change of the change in neighborhood was fluid. On March 12, 2020, the World Health Organization declared that the COVID-19 pandemic, the coronavirus outbreak, led to countries shutting down their borders, their business, restaurants, bars, and all other facilities. And therefore, COVID-19 pandemic shattered the usual religious experience as well in the neighborhood. Several churches, therefore, strategize on how to access religious practices, since public worship in person is no longer possible in the fixed physical places and worship and the worship communities. The church responded to it, to the crisis with creativity as a social and religious. The church proposed alternative ways in which congregations can reconnect with the church, with one another during the lockdown, social distancing and staying at home order. And there are some of their alternatives. They first transfer the liturgy, and then from transferring they translated and eventually led to transformation. However, today we can talk about advantages and disadvantages of this. Some of the advantages that we can see, the various neighborhood churches engage themselves to transition towards virtual service platform that can be lived eventually. No? So if you're going to take a look at the advantages, one advantage of virtual service is that they can be digitally stored and open to all. The other one is that congregants were present together through experience and possibly in time, but not in place. The other advantage is that setting for broadcasting for usually in churches implied digitally viewers in homes. Newolf, however, noted that people who were unaware or disengaged from the church a month ago are learning to or leaning now. I have people he said, I have people in my own life who have attended services now who never came to the building before. Our church has been a 500% Sunday attendance spike since the pandemic grew. And yes, people are texting in their decision to follow Jesus. And we are opening digital discipleship pathways and groups for more people than we have ever connected before. If we care about people in the future church, you will care about the digital church. Embracing the digital neighborhood post-pandemic, according to Heidi Campbell and Stephen Garner, look at the three areas of the concept of neighborliness in digital space. First, they examine how you know who the neighbor in the digital age is. Second, they talk about where to locate neighbor, where she or she lived in the digital space. And the third, they explored how should treat our neighbors online. There are some basic questions, however. If we are warped in media, how do we look at our neighbor? Second, or how do we look at somebody who shares a common worldview but as a different kind of interpretation? And the third question is, what do we especially do when those narratives about the religious others dissuade us from loving our neighbors online? My concluding remarks: the COVID-19 pandemic redefined our being neighbor from a casual face-to-face to interaction to internet mediated communication. This reality postulated challenges that a lot of us, especially those who are digitally connected and techno-savvy, to cope. Internet penetration increases, neighbors of inequality of access to the new information technologies, and now facing the challenges of digital divide, inequality between haves and the have-nots, and differentiated by dichotomous measures of access of the use of the new technologies is evident. There are also inequality among persons who formal access to the internet, and therefore the new normal, there is an increase between the border between the techno-savvy or the digital native and the digital migrants. I think if there are some questions, I can perhaps entertain them later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rico, for that presentation. And you can read much more in details this study of the neighborhood, both the classic as well as the digital neighborhood, in the chapter in the book. Is Father Robin here? If Father Robin is here, I would like to invite Father Robin to present his reflection next.
Yes, Father Anthony, I will. Will it be possible for me to keep my presentation final last, because there is some internet issues here, fluctuations are happening here because
Okay.
of
Okay, fine. Okay, fine. We'll let Father Quang go first, and then we'll give you time to deal with your internet issue, and
I
then.
will come last because it's a heavy raining and internet fluctuations are happening.
Okay, that's fine. We'll keep you for the next presentation. Is Father Quang, are you ready? Father Quang Pham?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah,
Good morning.
you're still awake, right? You're in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, good morning from Washington, D.C. So I think I can show the my presentation in very simple.
Maybe you can say a few words about yourself as well, so everybody knows who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, my name is Father Quang Pham. I come from Vietnam and I was sent to Taiwan for mission, and I was ordained there, and now I'm studying in Washington, D.C. in STL program in moral theology. So I hope that is enough. So if you want to know me more about what I am writing, what I was studying, maybe you find my article on page 291. 291 in chapter 16. So today I try to reflect or introduce about the topic I want to bring to you today is about the hospital ministry in the post-pandemic time of the Vietnamese Catholic Church. So my presentation will be start from the fundamental of the pastoral care. We all know that the Catholic Church faith invites us to serve Christ in the suffering and dying person. So we quote this from the ideas of Gospel of Matthew, said that whenever we do something for a suffering person, we do it for the Lord God Himself. So to respond to this call, the Church always tries to the best in providing care to the patients, especially those who are in their last moments on earth. Even in the case of patients affected with COVID-19, the Church is committed forming her pastoral presence to them. And we all know that during the COVID time, when the COVID pandemic first started, the priests were not allowed to visit and provide the holy sacraments to the patients at hospitals and medical facilities. Those patients have been, COVID-19 was unable to receive much needed pastoral care. Even when they die, no priest could come near their caskets to offer prayers or perform the last rites. But in this situation, there are some creativities from the chaplaincy. We say that there are a lot of restrictions, but many priests have been making creative use of social media, as we mentioned many times in the speech today, to maintain the pastoral contact with their parishioners or with the patients. So we know that social media and technology have made possible the virtual interactions among chaplains, pastoral caregivers, and those whom they provide pastoral presence. Because of that, the patients are still in virtual communion with the Christian community at large, with the daily masses being broadcast or living or live streams in almost all dioceses. And importantly, masses and prayers still provide for the departed can be offered under the special circumstances created by the pandemic. So from that is big picture, but I would like to share the experience in Vietnam. So we know that in the beginning of the pandemic, Vietnam was very successful in fighting the pandemic with strict policies in place. So you know that Vietnam has been praised and called a good model for many countries to learn. However, some months later, the situations has become very serious, creating confusion for people. So anxiety, suffering, and fear of death are everywhere throughout Vietnam, especially in Saigon City. And to avoid the virus spreading, the Vietnamese government closed the traditional markets that provide food to about two-thirds of residents in this city. So thousands of workers who come from other cities cannot continue to live in this biggest city because it was locked down. They try to return home to escape the pandemic in poverty and danger, struggling on motorbikes, bicycles, and on foot. Unluckily, some of them died on the way home. During this situation, the Catholic Church never used in the face of difficulty, rather to help people when they need it. And many bishops encourage their believers to pray and to be concerned for one another. Especially Archbishop Joseph Nguyễn Năng invited many priests, religious persons, catechists, and young volunteers to serve in hospitals. So we see that it is the first time in history of the country, Vietnamese government accepted some hundreds of priests and religious persons to be supported to serve COVID-19 patients. This is a major change in the country. In fact, priests, seminarians, and religious sisters are professional in volunteer work. They have certainly served with joy and confidence. So it is true that the COVID-19 pandemic opens up cooperation between authorities and religions on the front line of the pandemic, thereby perhaps more open and respectful relationships. So we also know that there is a big purpose for me in this article is to give a new approach to Vietnamese Catholic Hospital Ministry in the post-pandemic time. So if we compare, we say that in many countries, the hospital have established a department devoted to pastoral care of their patients, known as chaplaincy. But 99% of hospitals in Vietnam are run by the communist government, run by the Vietnamese state. As a result, chaplaincy programs cannot be found in any Vietnamese hospital. But with the eyes toward building up a strong pastoral ministry and a presence in hospitals in Vietnam in the future, I humbly provide some recommendations. Firstly, if during the COVID-19 pandemic, many religious workers have been allowed by Vietnamese government to work at the front line, they should be allowed to continue their service in the future. And if they are allowed to serve in hospital, they also need to be trained for teamwork and to incorporate diverse areas of expertise and profession. And of course, we also try to train the chaplaincy that they can know how to use full use communication software and digital devices. We also see that today most of patients receive medical treatment in the ICU with physicians, nurses, and medical staff fighting until the last minutes. So patients need not only physicians, but also the priests to provide them with spiritual practices, sacraments, and prayers. And also the final rites can be given in person to the patients. And the minister must have a physical contact with the patients receiving the sacraments of the anointings of the sick for these sacraments to be carried out validly. Thus, the priest or minister need to be allowed to work with other departments in the hospital. I have a short conclusion that caring for those who are suffering for the impact of COVID-19, hospital chaplains are in the optimal position to give credible witness to God's healing. Especially in Vietnam, in the most difficult time of the pandemic, many Catholic volunteers had the chance to work with physicians, nurses, and caregivers in hospital. They served with love, joy, patience, gratitude, and sacrifice. So I hope that Vietnamese government and Vietnamese people will change their mind to accept the service of the Catholic Church, because this is a principle of the Church. Love and serve our brothers and sisters, especially to patients who are suffering either in mind, body, and spirit. So that is what I bring to you today in kinds of sharing and also reflecting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Father Quang, for that reflection based on your examination of the situation in Vietnam and how the church responded to the situation, especially in the communication work of the church to those who are suffering, but also to call for solidarity among members of the church in Vietnam to serve and to care for one another. Now I would like to turn to Father Robin if he's ready to give the last reflection today, and if there's more time, then we may have some conversations together afterward. Father Robin, okay, I see you're sharing your PowerPoint already. Okay, you have 10 minutes.
Yes, in Kerala, suddenly a heavy monsoon is back and it was hitting, so I was not able to join in the right time. So, thanks for your question, waiting for me. So, the topic or the chapter which I presented was, or given in the book is digital religious communication in the Syro-Malabar Church during and the post-COVID-19 pandemic. So, just like other speakers, I will just introduce myself. I'm Father Robin. Right now, I'm working in a college, DePaul Institute of Science and Technology, where I'm heading the School of Communication and also the vice principal of this college, which is situated in Angamali, Kerala, the southern part of the country, India. So the objectives of this study was to examine the impact of COVID-19 induced regulations on the usage of social media for religious practices among the religious communicators and also the receptors belonging to the Syro-Malabar Catholic Church. So how COVID-19 pandemic, post and after, how it affected that induced regulations affected the religious communication of Syro-Malabar Church. Then identify a possible transition from online religion to religion online in the online behavior of the specific religious community. So I must introduce the Syro-Malabar Church before commenting about their online religious practices. Syro-Malabar Church is originated in Kerala, and the presence is evident from AD 52 onwards. So this church is here at the time of St. Thomas. So AD 52 onwards, we can have the evidence of their existence. And they are the first Christian community in India. And this community is having around 5 million followers. And they spread all over the country, all over the world, rather. A lot of missionaries are there working for this particular community. And they are mostly spread in Kerala. And we can group them as an Eastern Oriental church. So saying so, they are a very traditional church existing in Kerala. The core beliefs of this church, that is Syriac in liturgy. So they still like to follow that age-old language Syriac for the liturgical functions. Then Malabar in culture. The Malabar means that's a typical name given to the coastal belt of southern part of the country, India. Southern part of the country, India. So that culture is called Malabar culture. So the name of this church is Syro-Malabar. That Syro, in that Syro stands for Syriac liturgy. Malabar stands for the cultural, cultural behavior. They are Malabar in culture. The southern part of the India is called as Malabar culture. Then they're Catholic in faith, then alliance to Vatican and Holy See. Deep inculturation in tradition and culture is happened with this community, with Hinduism. A lot of inculturation can be, it's very evident in their cultural practices. Religion and ritual is a part of their personal identity. So the members of this community, they consider the religion as a part of their personal identity. Then this community is more of Eucharistic centered than the methodology. I conducted a personal survey for religious communicators and the receptors of the communication, that is the laity or the faithful. So I was able to get 152 communicators by convenient sampling. These communicators are either bishops or priests. Then 532 laity by snowball sampling. Then online survey through Google Forms, such a kind of studies, the Campbell is already, has clarified about or has given, possibility of having an online survey for such a kind of studies. So online survey conducted because the study rather happened, the first part happened during pandemic. The in-depth personal interviews also conducted, in-depth interviews conducted with all the media, religious channels, the heads of religious channels owned by this community. So Father Paul, there is a Goodness television channel. It's a satellite channel. So he is the managing director. So I interviewed him. Then Zachary Augustine, Shalom Television. Then Bonnie, program manager, Shekinah Television. These are the 3 television channels owned by this community in order to spread the religious messages. Then Bishop Jose Chittuparambi, he's a Rajkot diocese bishop. Bishop is also in the media commission of the Syro Malabar Church. So these prominent figures, I had in-depth interview. So Kerala and COVID-19, the first case of COVID in India was reported in Kerala rather. The government indicted lockdown, and which began on March 24, 2020. Then all the public religious practices were banned. All religious practices. So the churches were closed, the retreat centers were closed. Why retreat centers? The largest retreat centers of the world is owned by this community. That is Divine Retreat Center. It's situated in Ernakulam district of Kerala, the state Kerala, which has got a retreat happening simultaneously for 7 languages. And at times, 50,000 more people. There are times people attend 50,000 more people in resident retreat programs. So this community, the specialties, there are a lot of retreat centers. So all the retreat centers were closed. And the timing is Lenten season, the March. So that is a time where all the retreats were actually happening. So all the retreat centers were closed. Then the implications, the first time in the history of Syro Malabar Church, church officially endorsed online religious services. As I told before, this community is very traditional and they were not ready to accept the new technology in the first phase. So, but in the pandemic, church officially endorsed online religious services and the live streaming of Holy Mass was initiated, whereas there are public teaching by the bishops about the public Holy Mass should not be given through digital technology. There were public teachings at that time in this community. But at this time, they officially allowed the live streaming of Holy Mass. The first online Bible convention, that is a retreat program, many of the retreat centers conducted online Bible conventions at that time. Then almost every parish churches started new YouTube channels and Facebook pages. Then frequency of streaming of Holy Mass was increased into 3 times the increase. Before the COVID, it was just 1 Holy Mass in all their television channels, religious channels. But at the time of pandemic, the church endorsed them to increase the number of Holy Masses, and it came up to 7 Holy Masses per day. The core religious practices of this community were later redefined with the exemptions. Then, when we go through the age-wise distribution of the respondents, rather we got the middle age group more in number because, in order to become a priest in this community, minimum age is some 28 of years. So majority of the new priest and the young priest joined in the survey. Then the receptives also we can see the younger age groups are more. Then when we ask their question whether they support the usage of social media for religion, we can see 12.5% of the people said like only at times of social distancing, and there are 25% they said they use social media more frequently at times of social distancing. So definitely pandemic brought more people into social media platforms for religious communication and for receiving the religious communication too. So the most commonly used social media platforms for religious communications were Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, all those things. Then the opinion towards online Holy Mass. Why Holy Mass is, this community is very traditional and Eucharistic centered. So what was their opinion in the when Holy Mass is streamed through digital technology or social media platforms? So apart from Holy Mass, 50% of the, or more than half of the religious communicators were in an opinion that they won't use social media for Holy Mass. So they are still very traditional. Even in the pandemic situation, they still stay back and say that we are not ready to continue with the Eucharistic celebration through social media platforms after the pandemic. So receptives also, like the laity also joined with them. Their number is 60.2% said they are not ready to go for the Holy Masses through online. So,
Brother Robin, you have 5 minutes.
okay, I'll find it. So I'm winding it down. So the survey findings, the new uses for social media to attend or propagate religious services. So that was there are 1.8, that is the ratio. So that means 8 times more the communicators, more than 8 times the presence of the communicators in the social media platforms, that is the priest and the official religious communicators. So there is an increase in 8 times increased during the pandemic. Then the laity too, in order to attend religious communication, to receive religious messages, a 7 times of increasement we can see in there in the pandemic. But 30% of the communicators support the usage of social media for religion, but they do not believe they're trained enough. So this is another finding. They are ready to use the social media for religious communication, but they themselves believe that they are not trained enough. So we actually examined their syllabus and training methods in the seminaries, and we found that they are not trained enough to deal with the digital technology for religious practices. More than 50% of both the categories, both the communicators and the receptors, will continue to use online platforms apart from Holy Mass. So that apart from Holy Mass shows that they are still very traditional, and very minimal percentage of communicators and laity supported the use of social media for their core beliefs, like Eucharistic celebration. So the conclusion is, we can see there is a rapid shift from religion online to online religion, and more dedicated training needed for priests to handle online religion, then need for more communicators to be available in the online world. So the number of communicators are less actually in the online world. So this phenomenon, which happened in the Syro Malabar Church during pandemic about their religious communication, can be called as induced online religion. They're ready to change, but not to their core beliefs. So when it comes to their core beliefs, they want the proximity, they want to go back to the churches. So this phenomenon can be termed as induced online religion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Robin, for that study of the church in India in a local context, but I'm sure the context that you are examining is quite relevant to other contexts in other churches too, as we find that many religious leaders, local churches, are having some levels of difficulty in their use of social media because they feel that they are not trained enough. And the point that you say that there needs to be more formal training for pastoral agents so that they can employ social media and other technology in their ministry is something that I think the church, many places are looking into and also grappling of how to carry out effectively. Thank you for that. Can you please unshare your okay, I think we've come to the last presentation. We had one more presentation from Father Norman, but unfortunately he had to go to celebrate Mass, so he couldn't stay with us. Is there any question or comments regarding what you have heard from our presenters? This is just a very small slice of all the content of the book. The book has 18 chapters. And today we've only heard from 4 of the contributors. So it's kind of just a taste of various topics that are in the book. And is there anyone who would like to make a comment? Yes, Deborah, I see your hand. You can just turn on your mic there.
Thanks, Anthony, and all the contributors for this publication. For those who don't know me, I'm the communications officer for the Divine Word Missionaries in the Australia province, and I've just stood down from a 6-year term as the chair of the Australian Catholic Media Council, and we on the council have been doing a lot of the same kind of thinking and looking at this question as you have. So this is very helpful for me to be listening into. I really appreciate the last point about digital training. We are just engaging in some of that at the moment with our various communicators around the country, and through them pastors and priests and people. So we're engaging in that, and I really appreciated the need to do that. I also wanted to pick up on Father Rico's point about the digital divide, because I guess that's something as gospel people that we always want to be keeping our eye on, and we found through the COVID experience that there was pockets of that, even in a country like Australia with a generally high standard of living. The elderly were particularly marginalised during the COVID pandemic, when people were engaging with their parish through a digital means. Elderly people were not able to do that. One of the things we have here in Australia is a televised Mass, which has been on TV for more than 50 years now. And we found that a lot of elderly people really engaged with that during the pandemic. And then we actually discovered many more people who had been depending on it for many years, when they lose that sense of community, when they're not able to go to their parish for reasons of illness, or when COVID was here, how much they depend on that sense of community, still being able to partake in the Mass, in a digital sense, but also the sense of community that it builds. So I just appreciated those points being made, because we're working really hard to try and keep that Mass on TV. It's expensive, as everyone knows, to keep things on television. So we're working really hard to make sure that everyone benefits, I guess, from abilities, that have happened around the COVID time, to keep people engaged in their parish when they can't be physically in their parish. So thank you to all the contributors. I've appreciated it.
Thank you very much for your comment and observations, Deborah. I think what you're saying is very pertinent, because when we talk about digital divide, it's just not between the rich and the poor, but also gender. Some of the countries, for example, Indonesia, there's a digital divide between male and female. And in South Korea, where internet connection penetration is extremely high, there is also a digital divide in terms of age. And studies have found that people under over 70 years old in South Korea are significantly less connected to the internet than people who are younger. So there is that divide as well. So there's when we speak about digital divide, we have to look at different contexts as well. I like to invite other comments if possible. Yes, I see a hand raised from Father Joseph Tuan. Is that a hand
Yes,
raised?
yes. Thank you very much for on contributors. I would like to share the situation here in Papua New Guinea. You know, what you have shared is very strange to me here in Papua New Guinea. We don't have any problem with pandemic. School continue, public transport continue, everything is continue, everything is normal. So the question I would like to ask, to raise, is this communication make the situation become worse? Because the situation here in Papua New Guinea, especially in the place I am serving, no TV, no newspaper, no social media. So people they don't mind, they don't care, even they don't believe in coronavirus. So they are living a normal life as usual. And even in school here where I'm serving, there are some cases reported with symptoms of coronavirus, but we are not sure. We just isolated them. After 2 weeks, they continue back to school and continue their study. So I would like to share a little bit situation here, so that you have another vision about pandemic. Come back to the another sharing. I would like to about the presentation of Father Quang about chaplaincy in hospital in Vietnam. I have this experience when I was in seminary. During 2 years, I served in hospitals. Of course, we don't have any chaplain, official chaplain in any hospital in Vietnam. But we have another system to do our chaplaincy. We have Catholic nurse, Catholic doctors, sisters, even we, seminarians, we used to go there, visit them. And this is what I did. We have a list of Catholic patients provided by the doctor, by the nurses, and they come up with a list. So when I came to the hospital, I just received the list and I brought the Eucharist already with myself, and I visit according to the instruction in the paper. So it's another way we can do the chaplaincy in hospital. I would like to share so that you have some more idea about the situation in Vietnam also. Thank you very much.
Does anybody would like to respond to the comments of Father Joseph? He made 2 separate issues there. He raised 2 separate matters there. Does anybody have comments?
Me?
Yes, Father Jadera.
Yeah, I'm Jadera Habel from Indonesia. I'm doing my PhD in missiology in Rome. Okay, to respond to the Father Joseph question, I am also thinking about that, because the need to go inside the digital area or digital continent, it's not about the pandemic itself, but right now it's already being a big, massive thing that we should go through. We should go beyond that the massive development of digital continent. So it is our task, our duty right now to, especially for those, for fathers, for religious, for all the priests who in task to do the missionary task, not only to use it, but how to go inside it. Because the pandemic itself, yes, maybe, and also in some places in Indonesia, they don't believe in pandemic, but the digital spreading is already massive. So it's not only about the pandemic itself, but we have also to go. We have to realize that right now, it's not only about it. We think about the tools or something like technological development, but how we realize that it is also our duty to go and spread the good news. So like division, for example, digital division in Indonesia, there are also another term of division between young people and also the elder one. I realized that when the pandemic started, there's brothers that who are the first are trying to go inside the digital meeting, digital worship, digital seminar, or digital catechism. It's not there. They were not. The young people who introduce themselves that they are very digital man, but the elders, they are trying to how to test their faith, their need of gathering together in digital way. So they are trying from migrant to be a native digital like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that comment. Any other comments from our participants regarding the point that Father Joseph raised? Okay, Father John, I see your hand up.
Yep. I just want to make a short comment. As I heard the father from speak from Papua New Guinea, it reminded me what I shared was that the pandemic has been more than a health crisis. And here in Thailand, it's also been political, and it's been used for political purposes by political elites. So that's been accompanied by an ongoing emergency decree which stopped street protests, and that was recently dropped in the beginning of this month. So I just wanted to share that, because hearing that reminded me of how, to me, it's much more than a health crisis, and in different countries, I think it has different flavors.
Thank you very much, Father John. I see a hand up from June Estora.
Okay, thank you, Father Anthony, and for the participants and the contributors. I would like to commend first and foremost the contributors. No, but more importantly, I think I want to comment, or rather recommend, on the findings of Father from Syro Malabar, Father Robin, right? When he was talking about the shift from online religion to religion online. Am I correct? But I think what is more important to note in the findings of Father Robin is this, that indeed, as I think this is also in support to the comment of the guy from Indonesia earlier. I think what is more important, that's Father Joseph. I think, no, the one from Indonesia earlier. Anyway, the main point is this, no? The findings of Father Robin do indicate the need for formation, the digital formation. As you realize now that well, actually the church was caught unprepared, quote unquote, with the pandemic. So as the presenters would say, no, they don't know more or less how they're not properly trained, as indicated in the result or in the findings of Father Robin. So I think in the perspective of the church or religious communicators per se, I think there's really a need to look into the formation aspect of those who, of the not only the seminarists perhaps, but also the religious communicators or church communicators for that matter. And I really commend the findings of Father Robin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, June, for that. I see a hand up from Father Quang.
Thank you for the Father Joseph Cao for your comments on my topics. From your comments, I think about how lively Vietnamese church is, because we don't have the system of chaplaincy in hospital, but a lot of people do that job. So what you said, that we have a lot of volunteers, we have a lot of priests and seminarians, the sisters or Catholics people, they are visiting the patients. They do it every day. So they have their way, because the government doesn't allow us to have a system of chaplaincy. But we are doing that. So I mean, from your comments, we see that the church in Vietnam is very lively. So my concern is how can we have in the future a trust between the government and our religious life, because we do a lot of things, but the government still observe. So how can we have a really a good system? And the other thing is when I write about these topics, it is very difficult for me to find the articles on this kind of area. I mean the chaplaincy. And I didn't see any articles in English, so I can say that maybe my article is the first one write about the hospice. I mean the hospital ministry in Vietnam. So I hope that yeah, a lot of us can contribute more articles on about whatever we are doing. We are doing this a good job, but we need to share to the world, to the people who are really can know that Vietnamese church is very lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Father Quang, for your input. I see a hand up from Father Robin. Father Robin, you can turn on your mic.
Okay. Thank you, Father Joss, for your good comment. Father, one thing I noticed when I'm doing my studies, most of the major seminaries in Syro-Malabar Church won't allow the seminarians, rather they may be deacons or sub-deacons, to use a mobile phone. So they're that traditional. So if they are not allowed to use a mobile phone, or rather they are not trained to use a mobile phone, how can we expect them all on a sudden to use the digital media in their ministry? And what I noticed is actually this paper which I presented is a part of my thesis. Like actually I conducted my study on 6 churches, and I presented only from the viewpoints of from the points of Syro-Malabar Church. If we go through other churches, there is one other church, there is CSI. They stand with a better advantages. Like they have a proper media system with them. Then they have all the facilities to teach a digital technology, including a studio, sound lab, sound engineers, and all the video editing, most advanced system. And it has been found that they are doing better in their ministry with the digital technology. Almost all their communicators are into the using the digital technology for effective communication. But whereas a traditional church like Syro-Malabar, everything is there in the syllabus. But what is taught to them is very theoretical. That is what I have found. So a paradigm shift is a paradigm change is needed in order to equip them to effectively using media, especially digital technology, for religious communication.
I was recently in Vietnam, and I was at one of the religious communities in Vietnam, and the formators were discussing about whether it was proper or not to let our seminarians use the phone in their private use, in their rooms and so on. So this is not only in the church that you're discussing, Father Robin, but I think in other churches in other countries as well. So I think especially in Asia, I think there's still a lot of reservations regarding digital technology and how much we can let our seminarians, even though they're already studying philosophy, theology, and even deacons, to use digital technology in their daily life as well as in their work. So I think this is still a discernment issue for many religious communities and dioceses. Yes, I see Father Sunil has
I think, Anthony, one of the reason I suppose most of where I come from, also in Pune, we didn't have the cell phones. One of the reason I suppose it's also cost effective, economic finances also. If 100 seminarians in Kerala or India or Vietnam, and if each one has got iPhone or a Samsung phone, 100 phones, 100 Wi-Fi and internet, and the cost plus the distraction, perhaps maybe the studies. So it's only now, perhaps slowly, the maturity is coming in and say how responsibly use the social media. We also know so much of negative content of social media amount in the young people in Australia. So that's what I see mostly in Asian context. Large number of seminarians, and Wi-Fi is very expensive. And if 100 seminarians use the Wi-Fi and every day, hours and hours of internet content, that could be one reason. And secondly, the facilities, yeah. So to have the mass medias.
Thank you very much. I think we are running short on time now. We were planning for an hour and a half, and now we're approaching 2 hours. So I think we may leave our conversation here, and I'm sure this is an unending conversation in many ways. I was going to invite Father Norman to say the closing prayer, but now he's not here. So can I ask Father Tony Pernia to say the closing comments and prayer for us?
Yes, I was just intrigued before I say the prayer. I was just intrigued by the question about the use of the cell phone in the seminaries, because I was wondering, during the pandemic, classes were held online, right? And so I'm wondering whether the seminarians, the theologians in their classes, whether they had use of I'm sure they were forced to use some kind of a digital device, no? to be able to follow, unless they didn't have online classes. So I was wondering regarding that question about the use of iPhone, cellular phones, and other electronic devices by students, by seminarians. I felt that during the pandemic, the students were forced to use it because of online classes, right? Yes, okay, let me say a closing prayer now. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen.
Receive, Lord, our fears and transform them into confidence. Receive, Lord, our suffering and transform them into growth. Receive, Lord, our silence and transform it into adoration. Receive, Lord, our crises and transform them into maturity. Receive, Lord, our tears and transform them into prayers. Receive, Lord, our anger and transform it into intimacy. Receive, Lord, our discouragement and transform it into faith. Receive, Lord, our loneliness and transform it into contemplation. Receive, Lord, our bitterness and transform it into peace of the soul. Receive, Lord, our waiting and transform it into hope. Receive, Lord, our death and transform it into resurrection. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, without end. Amen.
Thank you very much, Father Tony, for that beautiful closing prayer. I think it really encapsulated the spirit of today and the spirit and the intention of the book that we try to work on together. Thank you, everybody, all the contributors, as well as the participants, for your presence today. It's a great show of support for our work, and we hope that you will pass this book on to your friends and colleagues, or whoever, and just to make this research available to them as you see fit. And also, we ask for your prayers for the ongoing work of ARC. This book focuses on the communication of the church, but ARC is actually an interreligious project that tries to engage in interreligious dialogue and interreligious scholarship. So we ask also for your participation and your support for and prayers for our future work as well. So on that note, I thank you once again, and I wish you a happy evening or afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Anthony.
Anthony. Lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Father Anthony. Bye. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much and congratulations.
Stop the recording now.
Congrats, Father Anthony.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Father Tony, for